And we're live. What's up, everybody? Thank you so much for joining us today. We have a very special guest on the program. He is an author, an activist, and the great grandson of none other than Mahatma Gandhi. Tushar, it's an honor to have you on.
It's my pleasure, dear Adar, and my greetings to all your viewers.
Thank you. Before we get started, I do just want to give a quick shout out to our Patreon visionary members. We have Renee Gordon, Adam Becker, Neve Goldstein, and David Edwards, and to all our supporters, really, those who support the show, help us make this content possible and help us on our mission to reconcile between people in conflict. If you want to support the show, you could find how to do that in the description. Any and all support is greatly appreciated. So Tushar, one of the themes of this program is to really look for peaceful ways in which we could solve a conflict that's been quite violent, that's taken the lives of tens of thousands of people, and really no end in sight. And I have been super inspired by your great grandfather Gandhi and how he went against our intuition, our instinct for violence, and liberated India through nonviolent means. And I think it's a brilliant case study that people all over the world should learn from and be inspired of. So I'm interested in how you feel the teachings of your great grandfather apply to the Israel-Palestine conflict and what we could be doing differently here.
Adar, we must remember the fact that when Israel was formed out of the Palestinian lands, my great grandfather warned about the sowing of future conflict, and he said that this, instead of resolving a situation, is going to make it even more complex. And he was criticized at that time for that, and in a true to form, his statements were also branded as being anti-Semitic. But I think what he said, it was prophetic, and unfortunately, we have seen the propagation of that conflict because, let's face it, Adar, this conflict has gone beyond, the need for justice, the need for compassion, the need for understanding, and it has become an opportunity for profiteering for a lot of people. And as soon as that element creeps into any situation, then there is a vested interest that does not allow for that conflict to be resolved in any other way, because they only see it as a means to make profits. And if the conflict is resolved, then that means of profiteering ends for them. And unfortunately, that is what is happening today in Palestine.
So the way you see it is because there are external forces who profit off the conflict, which is unfortunate reality. It makes this conflict, would you say, unsolvable or just much more challenging to solve?
Much more challenging to solve, because I don't believe in anything being undoable. I am a optimist kind of a person, and I see that if something appears to be undoable, it's only because an honest attempt has not been made, and that's where it appears to be bigger and stronger than it really is. So I don't see anything as unsolvable. I do understand and I do admit the fact that the profiteering angle is so great, and it's not just for the outsiders who are meddling in it. This has conflict everywhere. If you make a study of conflict anywhere in the world, you will see that almost everybody in that profit at one point of time starts seeing that conflict as a means to profiteer, whether it is in terms of money or it is in terms of other opportunities or other goodies that come their way, somewhere or the other there is an undeniable angle of opportunity Um and so that is where the whole situation gets vitiated.
I appreciate you saying that because one of the challenges that I think we face is this lack of hope and lack of belief. If you look at polling, the majority of Israelis and Palestinians don't see any way to solve the conflict. They think it's solvable, and when you don't have belief in a certain outcome, it's nearly impossible to achieve that outcome. So I appreciate your optimism because step one to really solving it is believing that it's solvable. Um, and I do agree with you that despite there being external influences, if the will of the people here on the land is strong enough, then external forces won't get in the way of us solving this conflict. Are you still with us? Your screen's gone black. In the meantime, we'll speak to some comments. So Orr goes, mostly conflicts are a loss, not a profiteering endeavor. This ideology that profits run conflict was already debunked. It's nothing but historical belief that doesn't fit reality. So, or
Sorry.
I'm yeah, I'm just responding to a comment. Or I think that what you're describing, and Yuval Noah Harari made this case in one of his books that conflict is no longer profitable for nations who engage in conflict because of the effect it has on the economy and that we're globalized and we're dependent on other nations prospering for us to prosper. But I don't think and unless you mean something else, but I don't think that's the claim that's being made here. It's not necessarily that a nation profits from conflict as a whole. It's that there's certain groups that themselves profit. So, for example, you have defense contractors, which certainly profit from conflict. The question is, what? Hold on, there's a lot of background noise because there's a. Can you guys hear that background noise, or is it just me?
Yeah, I can hear it. Yes,
Yeah,
but it's not that disturbing or distracting. That
yeah.
is.
I'll go inside real quick until the garbage truck leaves. But the question is, who are these entities who do profit from conflict, and how much influence do they have? What is their lobbying power? How can they influence um, politics and public opinion? And I think there's still a very strong case to be made that those entities do have impact over foreign policy. So I don't think I agree with you, but feel free to clarify that point or make a counter.
Adar, first of all, I want to say the reason why both Palestinian and Israeli groups feel that this conflict is irresolvable is because they are both only looking at it from their own selfish requirements and needs. And I don't. Uh, I see why that is so, because for both of them, it feels as if unless they get rid of the other, the conflict will never be resolved. It is because there is no compassion for each other amongst the groups in conflict that they feel that this is irreversible. If the Israelis started compassionately thinking of the need of the Palestinians for a homeland, and if the Palestinians compassionately started thinking and agreeing that for the Jews of Israel who have now called that state their home for so many decades, whether its inception was justified or not. Today, too much water has flown under that bridge, and an acceptance has to be made of the existence and the right of existence of both the groups. It will always seem irresolvable because the Jews don't want Palestinians in Palestine, and the Palestinians don't want whom they consider to be the invaders and the encroachers to remain in that land. As long as that mindset remains, It's very justified for people to believe that no, this can never be resolved. But you must remember, nothing has remained which cannot be resolved. If South Africa could transition from autocratic, brutal apartheid state to an inclusive rainbow nation, it's all possible in the world. And yes, I agree that nations in the long run don't benefit from conflict or profiteer from conflict, but it is individuals and corporates that continuously benefit and profiteer from conflict, whether they are weapons sellers, whether they are defense contractors, whether they are mercenaries, whether they are politicians who continue to have their influence only because they sort of represent or they claim to represent one facet of that conflict. For all of them, there is a selfish motive, and which the continuing conflict panders to and benefits. And that is what profiteering really is. It's not just the profit margins or the money that they make. And the price is paid by innocent humanity, who is neither fighting on the battlefront nor even being supportive of that conflict, who just want to live their normal day to day lives. They pay the biggest price for the profit, lust for profit of these individuals and corporates.
So, in terms of, you know, uh, a need to recognize the need of the other, I think that's an excellent point. So, I want to ask you a question because from what I've read of your background and your views, it seems like you think that the solution would be the establishment of the Palestinian state on the entire land. Is that correct?
What I believe is there is a need to create the whole problem has arisen because the world till today has only talked about the two nation resolution. The
Right, the
two
two-state
nations
solution.
is not a resolution. It is the sowing of a ongoing conflict. What has to happen is a singular nation of Palestine, which includes on an equal term Palestinians and the Jewish Palestinians, Arab Palestinians and the Jewish Palestinians who have now got a right. Maybe the Jewish settlers in the beginning did not really have a right to that nation. But too much water has passed under that bridge for now saying that the present generation of Jews living in the land of Palestine do not have a right to live there. Right? It is not feasible, it is not even acceptable. And so it has to be a singular Palestinian nation where both live on equal terms with equal rights, equal duties, and compassion for each other.
Right. So I definitely agree with you that people living on the land have the right to remain on the land. I guess where we differ is the idea that one state equality across the board is actually going to result in peace and actual equality. I think, given the current nature of the conflict, something like that would just lead to more bloodshed. And what causes me to conclude this is if we actually ask Palestinians what they don't want a binational state. They want a Palestinian state for Palestinian people. And when you ask them what should be done with the Jews, some say they could live as guests or stay as guests, meaning second class citizens. And then others say the Jews would need to leave. Only 7% of Palestinians in the most recent poll support the solution you just described. So while the idealist in me says, yes, that's great, I don't see how in reality we can that would
That
work when
is,
that's not the will of the people.
the problem is that neither will support this solution. Neither of the groups will support this solution because both the groups are just selfishly wanting the whole sack of candies for themselves. And that is not going to be possible. That will continue. Yes, I agree that the single nation where both groups are forced to live together may lead to violence for some time. But at the end, when the realization occurs that this is the only deal that we are going to get, the instinct to live on and continue with life will kick in, and the habit of living together with each other will be formulated. At the present moment, although it is not declared, Palestinians are being treated as second class citizens. I hope you will agree to it. Their movement is restricted, their ability to earn is restricted, their freedom is restricted. It may not be stated in the law, but it is so much there in practice. So, where is their justice or equality in
Yeah,
this present
well,
context?
I would agree that Palestinians who are not citizens of Israel are even less than second-class citizens. They're non-citizens, and they certainly are subject to a different set of laws and conditions than Israeli citizens. Palestinian citizens of Israel are equal under the law. There might be some systemic issues and cultural challenges between Jews and Palestinians that need to be resolved, but generally speaking, Palestinian citizens of Israel have access to opportunity and the full rights that Jewish Israelis have. But we have no disagreement with the treatment of non-citizens of Israel living on the land. Um,
See, the thing is, Adar, who decides who is a citizen and who is non-citizen?
well, I
If
mean,
Israel, if Israel says certain Palestinians are non-citizens of Israel, then it gives rise to the Palestinian demand that all Jews are non-citizens of Palestine. There has to be. See, what I'm trying to say is, unless we find a middle ground, the conflict will remain unresolvable.
I agree completely, but because of what you just said, that there's this imbalance and there's this injustice, many Palestinians, their sense of justice seems to be more akin to vengeance than it is justice. It's not simply we want self-determination. It's that Jews can't get shouldn't have the self-determination or shouldn't be able to live freely on the land, or because of what they've done to us, we will now do this to them. And that idea, right, that support for violence or the removal of Jews from the land gives Jews a lot of anxiety towards any solution that would put them in danger. So I think in order to actually solve the conflict, we need to look at the desires and needs of both people. Jews are saying we want to be safe. Palestinians are saying we want justice. So it's a
That's what I
question.
said. That's
Yeah.
what I said right in the beginning, that the only way it can happen is that the Palestinians will reassure their Jewish fellow citizens that they are as equal to anybody else and have the protection of the state like anybody else, which today the state of Israel is denying to the Palestinians. We cannot deny that. Other, you may classify certain Palestinians as citizens of Israel, but all Palestinians are looked upon with suspicion in the state of Israel at the moment, and that is not fair at all. And so the only way a non-violent resolution of conflict can happen is if faith and trust is restored right in the beginning, and say that this, and it's not as if this is a utopian concept. When South Africa was under apartheid, the whole world believed that the blacks would have a justification for revenge on in the name of justice over the whites who brutally oppressed them for so many decades. And yet Nelson Mandela's vision for that nation and his belief that his nation cannot survive if it went down the path of vengeance has helped South Africa remain peaceful when the whole world believed that it would break down into chaos and violence and a bloodshed would happen over there. So it is possible that even groups that completely distrust each other can come to a middle ground if there is a will and if there is a kind of a solution offered to them.
Yeah, so I agree completely that if there's goodwill, on both sides, we could certainly solve this. I do think, however, though, and this I think is our main area of disagreement, that the solution you're looking at, I think, can only be achieved after generations of peace, reconciliation, and healing, because the level of fear, mistrust, and hate that our populations have of one another, we would need safeguards in place to keep the population safe, at least initially.
I
Um,
think Adar, here the misconception is that the hate and the suspicion and the fear of each other is genuine. I believe that in this conflict, also the warmongers and the profiteers from this conflict are keeping that fear psychosis alive and are very successful in doing that. They have not allowed the attempts to build faith amongst the populace to succeed ever. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been possible for, one of the groups in this conflict would have been wiped out long ago if the fears and suspicions and doubts about each other were genuine. The fact that for so long Palestinians and Jewish Israelis have been able to live in that one piece of land itself says that in some ways there is a reconciliation to the fact that now, this is what we have to live with. And that is what we need to work upon. And that is from where the trust will be built. Yes, I know it's a slow process. But if we keep saying that this is impossible, it'll never happen.
I think we're in agreement there that it's a slow process and that we need belief in order to get there. Um,
Yes.
what the I'd be more interested in now discussing what that process would actually look like. So, you know, Palestinian resistance has been primarily focused on violent resistance, and the primary target has actually been civilians. And the way this is justified by Palestinians is saying we are attacking colonizers. Violence towards colonizers is justified. The way Jews look at it, Jews don't view themselves as colonizers; they view themselves as an indigenous population that returned from exile and achieved statehood. So it seems like what is could in theory be effective strategy towards a colonizer is actually counterproductive towards uh, another indigenous people, because we view these acts of violence as an existential threat, and it only causes Jews to be more radicalized and support more policies that ultimately harm Palestinians. So I sometimes say, where is the Palestinian Gandhi, right? It would be nice to see someone rise up and lead the people towards means of resistance that would actually improve the lives of Palestinians. And this isn't shying away from the fact that Israel also needs much better leadership and better activists on their side. But I'm wondering what you think Palestinians can do in terms of resistance that would actually help them achieve their goals.
Adar, first and foremost, I disagree with this mentality of um, Jews claiming to be in exile who have returned to their homeland. That was Palestinian homeland, and Europe got rid of Jews whom they did not want in their midst post the World War and sent them to. If there is any exile, it is European Jews who have been exiled from their lands of their ancestors and homes from their ancestors to a land that was uh, given a historic justification to return. So, of course, I respect your point of view and I'm not going to dispute it. But the fact is that today, the settlers in Israel are all descendants of those who were exiled by Christian Europe because they did not want Jews in their midst anymore. So, if there is any exile and if there is any return to roots, then the roots are in Europe, not in Palestine. So having said that, I don't want to go into, because I believe that if we want to resolve the conflicts of the present, we should be looking at the future and not at the past. And so I don't want to go into that at all. But I must say this very explicitly that that historic justification of a homeland in Palestine of Jews does not hold water in present day or in the time when Israel was formed. Maybe a injustice was done in medieval times, does not resolve that injustice by compounding that injustice in modern times and doing it. And when it is not justified, almost all the settlers who formed the state of Israel did it because their existence in Europe was threatened. The honest thing to do was to remove that threat to their existence in Europe and not create another conflict by claiming that this is the only place in the whole on the whole earth where Jews could feel safe. Where is that safety? You say that Palestinians continue to target civilian Israelis. So where is that security for the common Jewish Israeli, even over here, even when they enforce it through the barrel of a gun? Where is that security? Where is that safe haven? Because this is an unnatural solution, it is not becoming an honest solution, and it keeps creating that conflict. I think other people who feel that this conflict threatens all of humanity if not resolved must stop looking into the past and justifying actions because of something went wrong in the past and say, okay, there was an injustice in the past. It happened. We had nothing to do with it. Let's move on and look at the future and ensure that these injustices don't continue to happen in our future too.
So I'm with you that we need to focus on the future, but I think there is a big area of disagreement between us here. First of all, it's less so important. We could have a debate on how to define indigenous and who indigeneity applies to, but it's important to understand how Jews living on the land see themselves in order to understand their mentality and in order to understand what strategies will work towards changing the dynamic on the land. That being said, if you look at the makeup of the Jewish population on the land, around 50% come from Europe, around 50% come from Middle Eastern and North African countries. But if we actually go farther back and we look at the DNA of the Jews living on the land, we actually, most of us originate from the Levant, from the land. So we were a population that had been exiled for thousands of years. And in that exile, we changed a bit culturally, and we did mix with other native populations. But every year, religious Jews, or every day, religious Jews turned to Jerusalem to pray. There was this constant yearning to return to the land. And you know, every year at Passover, Jews say, "Next year in Jerusalem." So this idea that Israel just popped out of nowhere because Jews were kicked out of Europe, it's not really how it
See,
happened.
again,
Real
you
quick,
are
Tushar,
giving.
the
Oh, sorry.
Jewish people came from the land. Their religion, culture, and language came from the land. They were exiled and yearned to return for thousands of years, and found an opportunity to return. And we would agree on the fact that how they returned and the establishment of a Jewish state was a major injustice to Palestinians. There's no denying that. But understanding the indigeneity of the Jewish people, I think, is essential to seeing what an effective strategy towards creating a peaceful
Adar,
future.
Adar, if we were to insist on restoring the world to how it was 10,000 years ago, a lot of what we have come to accept in the present would be unsustainable and would have to be reverted back to it. Too much water has flown to continuously keep going back and saying our DNA was from here and our language was from here and our holy land. Many people have been displaced in that way in the past when the concept of democracy did not was not even thought of in the world. How long do we want the world to suffer because despots in the past committed crimes against humanity? How long? When are we going to move on? And if we keep justifying this, then the whole of United States of America's existence as a Christian nation comes into question. So much of the world, even the Levant, as you rightly called it, needs to revert back to the Turkish Caliph. Let's not go into that area.
But
Let's be
Tushar,
in the present and go forward towards a better future than our past.
Tushar, I'm not making the argument that we need to revert to the borders of the past, and any population that was ever displaced should come and displace the population currently living there. I'm just explaining that is the reality of what happened,
But that's what is happening.
and understanding how Jews see themselves, I think is important. And I think if we want to build unity on the land, one of the ways to do it is to accept that Jews and Palestinians are two distinct indigenous populations that have been fighting with one another, and we could live and share the land as two indigenous populations. So the only reason I
Yes,
push back on this is A, on the like for the sake of historical accuracy, and B, because I think it could be an important point for reconciliation between our people.
that's where I have never said that the present citizens of Israel, the Jewish citizens of Israel, don't have a right to live over there. I committed to the fact that today, no matter what it was in the past, no matter what it was many centuries ago or many decades ago, today both the ethnic populations have as much right to call that nation as their home. And so the only solution is to have the two ethnic populations living as the citizens of the same country with equal rights, equal responsibility, and equality in power. That's what I've been saying. I have not, for one instance, said that the Jewish population of Israel needs to be sent back to wherever they came from in Europe or in the rest of the world. From day one, I've been saying that the only resolution to this conflict is a agreement between the two warring parties without foreign influence or intervention of deciding to live in peace together and justice, not just peace, because today peace is also considered to be only enforceable through the barrel of the gun. That is not peace. The peace that comes from a will to understand and be compassionate is the only kind of peace that is sustainable. And that is what I've been saying all the time. So I don't deny the right of the Jewish people to live in the state of Israel, or as it should be, Palestine. I'm just saying that unless we come to that realization that both groups have a equal right, have a equal justification to that nation, must have that nation as one nation and not a artificially divided nation that keeps fighting with one another, and the stronger one keeps encroaching on the other nation's territories, which we are seeing today in the name of settlements. It's very a very fancy name, but it is continuous encroachment of lands that were at one point of time given to the Palestinians in that two-nation theory. So it is a corruption of that agreement of the two-nation theory that this ongoing program of settlements is happening, and there is no justification for it at all. It's like India going and encroaching on Pakistan and saying our population is growing so much, we need more land. And so, because it was our land before 1948, we're going to reoccupy that land. It cannot be justified in any manner. Two nations were created, and their sovereignty has to be honored and respected, no matter what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Israel today is not honoring that commitment for which its own leadership signed a pact designating Palestinian lands and Israeli lands. So even there is injustice towards the Palestinians. All this has to be stopped. If we continue to keep justifying all these things as a historic precedent and the right of the Israelis to safety and security and all that, the conflict will never be resolved.
Thank you. We're now going to take some audience questions. So chat, start asking questions. We're going to prioritize super chats. In the meantime, um, let's say we see that the people on the land have very different ideas of self-determination and what their sovereignty looks like. They have different ideas for governance. I'll even give you a hypothetical. Let's say the majority of Palestinians want the country to be run by Sharia law, right? Islamic law, which a 2017 Pew poll shows it's around 80% of Palestinians support that. Can we see this as, again, I go back to the same point that there's this idealism of this one state for all people, but if we can see that people have two very different ideas for what the state looks like, aren't we posing a great risk at having two distinct populations who have been in conflict for 100 years competing over control of one government and one military, rather than creating a more sophisticated system? And that doesn't need to be two states. It could be a confederation or a federation. But isn't it important to look at the wants of the people and determine a solution based on that?
I think if left to themselves, if Palestinians and Israelis are left to themselves and said, look, you need to agree that there is going to be just one nation, the makeup of that nation, whether it is a confederation, whether it is a federal power where both groups have their own administrative uh, fields and sectors and segments, all that can be worked out if an agreement on the basis of that nation is achieved. If Palestinians and Israelis, Jewish Israelis come together and say, okay, we now agree that we have to live in one nation. How we will live in that nation, how it will be ruled, how it will be governed, what laws will be practiced in that, we will sit down and work out to the best of possibilities. But let's not keep denying this, saying, oh, what happens if the Palestinians want to enforce Sharia law? And what happens if the Israelis want to enforce the tenets of Judaism on the whole population? And what happens if the Christians then want something for themselves? Let all that be in after the agreement that we have one state and we have to share it with each other. Let that be of primacy, and then everything else can slowly be resolved.
And what do you think of we I asked this earlier, but we kind of went in a different direction. What means of resistance do you think Palestinians should take that would be effective to achieving their goals?
I believe in nonviolent conflict, and I think the world has been given an example of passive resistance and its ability and power. But I also believe that as long as there is violent oppression, the reaction very naturally is going to be violence in return. And this is what has kept the conflict in the Levant going on, because everyone has just justified their violence, saying the other party began the violence. Over here, we need to break that cycle and say, even in the face of brutal violence, we will be nonviolent. Remember the fact that the British were not benevolent in India. If you list the brutal acts of violence and oppression that they perpetrated on the Indian population throughout their regime, it will be shocking. The whole idea of the British being gentlemanly and fair play in every colony that they ruled will dispel that fact completely. And so we have to come to a conclusion saying no matter how savage you behave, we will revert back with nobility. Then there can be a resolution.
Hmm. I think that's a powerful point that I wish all people on the land would hear. respond to violence with nobility, as hard as that may be, and that's really the brilliance of your great grandfather comes from. We have an audience member asking what your thoughts on BDS, the BDS movement is.
Um, I'm not very aware of the BDS movement. Can you explain it to me?
Yeah, so BDS is boycott, divest, sanction. It's, I would say, the leading movement of
Oh,
nonviolent resistance against
what was
Israel.
tried out in South Africa very effectively? In It is an eventual non-violent method of protest, and it has been proven to be effective in past conflicts. I hope that it never comes to that, because it is not a violent conflict in the sense of bloodshed and a thing, but it does violate the right of people to exist in or in an honorable way, and it inflicts a lot of suffering on the targeted population. So in. I don't consider it to be ethical, but at some point of time it could be justified, more justified than violent actions.
Thank you. Somebody else is also asking, because you push for the one state solution, they're kind of looking at the situation in India and they're saying, would you support one state between? And I don't know if this is a legit question because I'm not familiar with the conflict there, but people are asking, would you support for one state between India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh?
India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh were one state. They were the conflict was created by the colonizing British as their legacy when they knew that they were going to be defeated. So that question it doesn't is of no consequences. We were one state. We were artificially partitioned, and three states were created.
So do you think we should revert back to one state between
Oh,
those, or?
no, no, there's no reason for doing that anymore. As I said, Adar, throughout this talk, let's not uh, try to resolve even things that were unjustified and unjust and things in history. Let's say it happened. It's bad, and we regret that it happened. But too much time has passed now. Let's move on with what we
Right.
have. We continuously keep trying to, in our quest for justice, take revenge for the past. And that is what creates all the conflicts. Let's learn to move on. Life does not halt at some point of time in the past. It moved on, that's why we have a present, and it's going to move on, that's why we're going to have a future.
Yeah. You know, I think one way many people look at it is just the way the British split up the land and again, it's not that there's no conflict, India and Pakistan are still in conflict, but the way the British split up the land there, that's essentially what many view to be the solution here, to just split it up and have distinct populations having their own sovereignty. So I think they follow a similar logic to
The
Israel-Palestine that
two,
was followed with India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh.
the two-state solution that was given had that in mind, that okay, give Palestinians their land and give the Jewish Israelis their part of the land and let them exist. But what happened was Israel expanded and started justifying its policy of settlements, encroaching on the lands that were given to the Palestinians. And so the conflict continued that way. And so it shows that Pakistan, in India and Pakistan, the population accepted the partition and decided to live with it.
Mm,
Israel, the state of Israel, has not accepted the two-nation theory and continues to infringe on the sovereignty of the Palestinian lands. As long as that happens, the conflict will continue.
right. I mean, Israel has accepted partition plan in 47, but there has always been this segment of the population that has been expansionist, that would want to expand the land as much as possible. Some of the expansionist energy comes from a place of security. They say, the larger the land, the more we could defend ourselves. But I think it's primarily, a lot of it is like religious and ideologically based. That being said, I think that the only reason why expansionists in Israel have gotten their way is as a result of violence, which just goes to make the point how nonviolent resistance would have been more effective. Because, like, if we look at the building of settlements in the West Bank, um, most Israeli Jews historically have not supported this expansion, but they've been maybe indifferent to it. But those who really wanted to build have been very passionate about the idea of building. So even though they haven't been the majority, the indifference of the majority has allowed them to kind of have their way. And one of the reasons why there has been this indifference is because they view the conflict as unsolvable, and they don't think it's getting in the they don't necessarily think it's getting in the way of peace, because they don't think peace is possible regardless. So I think that it's unfortunate, because there's no fuel stronger to the expansionist energy than Palestinian violence against Israelis. So it's almost like the exact tactic to destroy Israel has just made Israel larger, which is
Adar,
yeah.
if you encroach on my home, wouldn't I be justified in fighting you off?
For sure. I let's look. So
And then if you justify that, saying, "Look, this guy fights me off when I intrude into his house. That's why I need to displace him from that house." How
so
does it make? How is it justice?
I'm less interested in what each side has the right to do. I think Palestinians have a right to resist, and I think violent resistance is a form of resistance. I'm more interested in what is an effective strategy. And again, when I'm speaking to
This whole
Israelis,
this whole sense of victimhood, and then saying we are victims, so what we do is justified on both sides, needs to stop.
I agree.
We need to
Let me.
go out of that victimhood thing, because every time we think of one of the parties as a victim, we are going to justify their actions.
I agree with that completely. And let me just give you an example on the other side. Israel always says, and Israelis always say, we have a right to defend ourselves, therefore these actions are justified. Palestinians say we have a right to resistance, therefore those actions are justified. I'm less interested in what right each nation has. I'm more interested in what form of resistance is going to lead to a better future, what form of self-defense will lead to a better future. So that's the framework I try to use in terms of uh, accepting an action as good or bad. Less so what we have the right to do, more so what is impactful. So that's really where it comes from more than anything else. I'm interested in results.
The, the the best thing to do is to move away from what is my right to do and act on what is right to do. There's a very big difference between the
There we
two.
go. I like that.
You know that nonviolence is difficult, but my great grandfather said that practitioners of nonviolence have to be prepared to suffer and bring about a change of heart through their suffering, sow the seeds of compassion through their own suffering. It is a very difficult ideology to follow. And in the present world, where unfortunately we still sort of eulogize the quick draw, quick shot cowboy justice mentality, it's impossible to believe that we would agree to the fact that, okay, we will win through our suffering. Nobody wants to suffer. They just want the benefits. And that's where the shortcuts happen, and that's where all the corruption of the ideal happens.
Mm.
So there has to be, you asked, where is there a Gandhi amongst the Palestinians? I want to ask you, can we find a Gandhi amongst the Jewish citizens of Israel who will treat both the groups with justice and compassion and bring about a change. It doesn't, you see, it doesn't have to be a Palestinian Gandhi, as long as it is a Gandhi who loves the people more than the land.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. That both we both sides lack leadership, and there, you could have really this Israeli leader that rises up with a transformative view and really changes the state of the conflict. And honestly, it would be easier if it came from an Israeli side, because Israel has more power to enact change. That being said, Israelis are much more comfortable with the status quo, and life goes on as usual for Israelis. So we don't feel the need to engage in activism. We'd rather there be peace. We don't have a vision for peace. So life goes on. The status quo is comfortable enough for Israelis. For Palestinians, the status quo is not comfortable. It's not sustainable, and will always lead to more violence until we find a way to change it. So ultimately, though, I think it's a good point that regardless of which side it is, we need powerful leadership to rise up, that which can transform
The
uh,
ideal,
transform
the
the land for the
ideal,
better.
the ideal solution to this would be a Palestinian leader who is accepted by the Israelis, trusted by the Israelis, who will then be acceptable to both because he is a Palestinian. The Palestinians will have their trust in him, and Israel will
Hmm.
put its faith in this man. That I see as the best resolution, or best chance of resolving this conflict, Adar.
Yeah. I'm with you on that. The only name that comes to mind is Marwan Barghouti, who's currently in Israeli prison. He I think is the most popular Palestinian leader. So
But
Israel should try to. Yeah,
remember one thing, history has proven that the best leadership is often incarcerated, and they come out of that
that's true.
incarceration to provide the resolution.
That's very true, and that's people compare Marwan Barghouti to Nelson Mandela often. It's a comparison I hear made. So it'd be, you know, wishing for better leadership, and that Israel has the wisdom to try to help a Palestinian leader rise up, which will work with Israelis towards a better future. Unfortunately, our leadership the past many decades has not been one that's focused on peace, but rather just maintaining the status quo, or maintaining the conflict. And it's not only unfortunate, it's tragic at the cost of life that we've seen.
On both sides, you just have profiteers who are disguised as leaders. They are not actually leading the people. They're exploiting the support that they enjoy in their groups of leadership for their own aggrandizement and for their own benefit.
Right. Um, Awesome. This was a great conversation. Just on a personal note, what are you working on these days? Like, what's your main focus?
Well, my focus is on writing, but I also am focused on writing about justice and equality for all. And I believe that there's so much hate prevalent in our world today that we need the message of compassion and love to be spread. And so I'm doing my little bit to do that.
That's a beautiful mission. Any plans to visit the land of Israel, Palestine soon?
I am a known sympathizer of the Palestinian cause, so I don't know how welcome the administration of Israel would be
Mm.
extend to me, but I would love to visit the land and meet with people on both sides of the conflict.
Yeah, that is unfortunate. Israel does have. I don't think that they're going to stop you from entering. There's been very few instances of people who weren't allowed to enter. It has happened, but it's been rare. I think what is more likely is that you may get questioned at the airport for a few hours. So it's not going to be like a smooth entry. They'll detain you in the airport. You'll get a few hours of questioning, and then you'll probably be free to enter the land.
Yeah.
So if you ever decide that that's what you want to do, please let me know, because I'd love for us to meet in person and even get to travel the places of Israel and Palestine together to see it
Adar,
firsthand.
I would love it. I would love it. Absolutely love it. And
Awesome.
I'm prepared for the harassment. As I said, those who believe in nonviolence are prepared for grief.
If only the people on the land would really have that mentality, understanding on one hand the challenges and the pain that comes with nonviolence, but really the brilliance and effectiveness of it. I think we'd be in a very different place. And when I say this, I speak of both sides with this message. So
Absolutely.
thank you for coming on. It's been a great pleasure. Until next time, Tushar.
Absolutely. See you soon. In